Right then, hello everyone and welcome to today's session. My name is David and I head up client service for Shopper Intelligence here in Sydney. If you're in New South Wales, I hope you had a thoroughly enjoyable long weekend, aren't too sun-kissed this morning. If you're joining us from elsewhere in the world or elsewhere in the country, then your time will come. Today, we're going to share with you some of the key shopper trends we've seen evolving this year and take a look at what they could mean for you. I'm joined for this session today by Caroline Burgess, our Melbourne lead, and by Simon Ford, our ANZ MD. Now, in her 2 years with the team, Caroline has built some exceptionally strong relations with clients, drawing on her background in retail and in insights to tell them what they need to know. Simon, meanwhile, well, he set the business up here in Australia some 11 years ago, and he still retains his youthful good looks today. Now, before I hand over to him, let me just assure you straight off the bat, you're going to receive an email after this session ends containing a link to the recording. And bear in mind, we'd love to hear from you over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Use the chat function for any general comments. Tell me how you're feeling today. Tell me what's going on in your world. Or the question function if you have something specific to put to us. I'll be touching on some of the best of those questions as we go through. If you just joined us, welcome. I'm about to hand over to Simon to kick off our Shopper Trends session today. So without further ado, it's over to you, Simon.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. Now, as David said, today is all about the trends in Australian grocery and what to expect over the coming months and years. So we'll talk a little bit about the COVID shock, but focus mainly on what's next for the shopper and the implications for your investment priorities, what it means for your retailer and supplier conversations. So here are the big themes, big three themes we'll focus on today. And get ready, because in a minute you're going to vote for which of these are the most important to you and your business. Firstly, value. Some shoppers in some categories on some occasions are retreating to value, either because they choose or they're forced to for economic reasons. But equally for others, they actually have just the same amount of money, maybe even more through COVID, and desire to trade up. So there is a flight to premium. It's quite polarizing. So where do you think your categories and brands sit and how should you invest? So we'll cover that today. The second big theme is e-commerce. We've seen a big step change in online sales. What does that mean for your online strategy versus bricks and mortar? And health. Certainly it's last, but it's not least. It's becoming more important, has becoming more important over the last 5-10 years. But a big step change again through the COVID period. So what does that mean in terms of shopper targeting? Which categories and brands should lead? What are the implications on price tiering and premiumization? So here are the big three themes. Let's jump to our first poll. So David, if you can do the honors. Here's the question here. So as I said, have a think about which one of these, and if you had to pick only one, it's hard, but if you had to pick only one, which of these is your biggest focus for F21? Now you can think about this from a personal point of view, perhaps in your role in your business, or you can think about this from a macro grocery channel point of view. But if you had to pick one, which is the most important theme, the biggest theme that you're focusing on or your business is focusing on through F21? I think we're just going to give
Simon.
Votes are flying in. That's good. How are we doing, David?
I reckon we are going to go ahead and see what we've got, shall we? Let's close that now. Thank you very much for taking part.
Okay, well done, everyone. All right, so, okay, well, fair enough. They're all important themes. That's why we chose them. So across the board, lots of votes, but perhaps unsurprisingly, value there just pips e-commerce. And health, I guess, is supporting all of that. So from an industry point of view, that tells us the story that you're most focused on value, and that's good. Caroline will deal with this in a moment, by the way, as we go through our themes. I think that's the order in which we have them as well. So there you go. But first, I just wanted to quickly cover off, for those of you who aren't familiar with Shopper Intelligence, a quick explanation on how we do this, how we go about this. In essence, we are all about putting the shopper at the heart of the conversation. So other data sources in the market tell you what's happening based on behavior, based on sales, and this is great. It's great in telling you if you're winning or if you're losing. What it's not so quite as good in telling you is why shoppers are making those decisions or explaining the sales behavior and trends. So for example, What are the missions? What are the occasions? What are the mindsets driving that decision making? How are dwell times trending through COVID? What does it mean for shelf efficiencies in terms of shopper behaviour? What does that mean in terms of your investment priorities and how you need to change as a result of that? So this is where we come in. We talk to shoppers. About their shopping trip. We observe shoppers in store to understand their behaviour, and this helps us explain the sales data and so helps us put plans in place to improve it. So after all, you can only really improve something when you fully understand why it's happening. So in summary, we're the why and the how to explain what the shopper is doing. And we work directly with all the 4 main grocery retailers in Australia. And through this, we help suppliers align with retailers, not just align, but lead the conversations based on the common need of the shopper. So let's jump straight into it, and a reminder of the enormity of what's hit us over the last 6 months. There's lots of slides and perspectives we can take on this, but arguably none more damning than the economic impact, which is huge and will continue to change as government subsidies and job market shifts. Of course, it depends on which industry you work in. Certainly relatively better to be in the FMCG industry at the moment, but no doubt we'll feel the impact as an industry, and certainly shoppers will for years to come, particularly from an economic point of view. So I'm going to look at a couple of things here, and we're going to start with behaviours. So it all started, you cast your mind back, with a mad scramble for toilet rolls and out of stocks concerns, and this led to erratic, very frequent, impulsive shopping trips and shopping behaviour through March and April, because simply shoppers couldn't rely on their chosen product or brand being in stock, and so they were switching around and having to come back to store a lot. Now, as that stabilised, and once shoppers had more confidence in the supply chain, they started then to switch back to a very different type of shopping behaviour. Because they could rely on that, they became more organised, they became much more highly planned, doing relatively infrequent and large shopping trips. So this has big implications on your investment pre-store, for example, versus shelf. So for example, how much do you invest in the catalogue given levels of planning and main shops have increased? Now, Caroline's going to touch on this later, but certainly what we've seen for the last 6 months is significantly higher levels of main shops versus top-up shops, and significantly higher levels of pre-store planning. So the category decision trigger is made pre-store. Now, of course, brand and segment and flavour and so on can still be switched or traded up at shelf, but that's what we're seeing. So if you want to trigger the category decision, then pre-store relatively more important. So that's the first big takeout for today, and that still holds. But the final thing I wanted to say here, and we run this program in North America and European countries as well, is that we do, in Australia, we started to see this drift back. And one of the questions I'm always asked is, what's the future going to look like? How will shoppers behave in future? And are we going to see a return to where they were quite quickly? Now, what we're seeing in Europe, particularly in the UK and Irish markets, where through their summer, they opened things up and things returned relatively back to normal, or quicker certainly than it did in Australia, is that these trends were similar to Australia, and then they came back to what they were before. Now we're starting to see that here. I would imagine that will continue as we come out of lockdown bit by bit. Of course, it's happening more gradually here, but I would expect the long-term trend to rebound to where it was before, albeit at a slower pace. And of course, there's lots of ifs and buts, very different in Victoria to New South Wales, and the pace of that change is slower, but that's where I'd expect it to go over the coming 6 to 12 months. Okay, so that's behaviour, but of course it's not just behaviour that's changed, but mindset and attitudes too. And this is really critical in understanding the reason for the behaviour change and the reason for the sales and differences in market. So what this slide tells you is what's important to shoppers. Now each bar reflects, the higher the bar, the more important that factor is. So things like price and quality and freshness are always the most important factors, certainly at macro level. In certain categories and segments it's different, but at a macro helicopter view, they're the most important things, supported by a strong shelf. in terms of location and simplicity and so on, and then the differentiating factors down at the bottom. Now, what I want to focus on today is a couple of big trends here. Now, first of all, the long-term trend in terms of, and this is what we see in the red and the green arrows, and the long-term trend over the last 4 or 5 years was very much away from price. So price is becoming less important to shoppers, still very important, but less important as time goes on. And the more differentiating factors like environment, social, sourcing of products, authenticity of brands and provenance of brands, innovation, ideation, an enjoyable shelf or enjoyable aisle are getting more important. And that's a long-term trend reflected around buying for today, around needs and occasions for more immediate use. So for example, dinner for tonight, a big trend in Australian grocery is leading a lot of these trends from an importance factor point of view. We've actually found that the closer the shopping occasion is, that moment of truth of the shopping occasion, the closer that is to the consumption occasion, the more these trends increase. So the more you're buying for today or for now, the more those differentiating factors are becoming more important and less reliance on price in terms of triggering that decision. So that's the long-term trend. If we now jump to the last 6 months and introduce the COVID factor, now we see we see a step change again. It's really accelerating a lot of these trends rather than reversing them. But the big themes coming through here in the last 6 months are a significant step change on the importance of health or healthy choices and quality. Again, I'd suggest those two things are linked. There's reflection of shoppers becoming more aware, more concerned with their safety, with health concerns around the product and what's in that product, but also supporting that Australian sourced, more important to people, and premiumization. So they're willing to pay a price premium for something that's a bit more local with high quality and offers them that healthy solution. So think about where your category sits, think about where your brands and segments sit on this, what's becoming more important to them. There is polarization. It's very different when you get down to different categories as well as different shopper types, but certainly some big step changes in trends and therefore how we should present categories and brands at shelf. Really important for you to understand where your category sits right now rather than 6 or 12 months ago. So finally, before I hand over to Caroline and we go through the themes, just a quick word on how the retailers did. So very simply here, the green boxes here tell you where each retailer improved post-COVID. So the channel as a whole actually did pretty well during and post-COVID. I think shoppers reflected the fact that we all were working 24 hours a day through supply chains, everything else, trying to make this right. Trying to get shoppers through the period, and shopper satisfaction reflected this. So much more satisfied across most departments, and particularly in Woolworths, where strong increases, but particularly in food departments, satisfaction significantly increased in context of Coles, which stayed level. So they seem to keep their shoppers the happiest through the tough times. Interesting to see if this endures. Now, there's a saying in retail that if you win Christmas, which is usually, most years, the busiest time of year, most stressful time of year from a shopping point of view. If as a retailer you win Christmas, then you win the year, as shoppers stay with you and that loyalty is sustained. So it's going to be interesting to see if the same applies to this high emotional state through COVID, and particularly with Woolworths, relatively speaking, has won the satisfaction battle through COVID, whether they sustain the loyalty of their shoppers who may have switched into Woolworths, and that continues. So that's what we've seen in terms of behaviour, in terms of attitudes, and in terms of retailer performance. So let's now dive into our 3 themes of value, of e-commerce and health. And to take us through this, I'll hand over to Caroline, who leads our Melbourne office. So Caroline, over to you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Simon. So let's take a look at our first theme, the new value equation. The story behind this headline, is the polarizing differences appearing by category and shopper type. Some have retreated to value, choosing more private label in many categories, and some have reached for more premium products, as Simon's mentioned, in certain categories, you know, to care for their homes, bodies, families, and rediscover home cooking. We'll look at the trends and quickly dive into leading categories and brands that have changed significantly year on year and escalated through COVID. But first, back to David for our second question poll. David?
Okay, thank you, Caroline. So our second poll touches on brand loyalty. This does actually have a right and wrong answer, so a chance for you to get a bit competitive. Specifically, one of these groups of brands has seen shopper brand loyalty increase through COVID, but which do you think that group is? Which group of brands has gained brand loyalty? Okay, 50-50 chance with this one. Is it the first group, Heinz, Master Foods, we've got Bird's Eye in there, we've got Pinaclean, or is it the second group, Ingham's, Gillette, Coca-Cola, Nurofen? We've got some big brands, both sides of this. We've got a lot of people voting. It's interesting where the votes are going. Give it another few seconds. I think this just goes to show just how seismic, I suppose, the shifts are that we've seen over the last 6 months or so. We've got about 86% vote rate. So this has got you all excited. I'm going to go ahead and close that, Caroline, and we will flash up what people have voted for. So 59% voting for option A, that's Heinz, Master Foods, Bird's Eye, and so forth. 41% saying Ingham's, Gillette, Coca-Cola. Caroline, back to you. Let's find out what the answer is.
Okay. Can everybody see that? We're back?
Yeah, all good to go.
Yeah, good. Okay. So interesting loyalty insights. So what's causing this? Importance of price dipped during peak COVID as availability concerns dominated. We know that, but has come back to original and even higher levels. And this in conjunction with a big jump in private label willingness to try. And we see that as an enduring theme. Yeah, internationally, we've seen big jumps in that as well. As Simon mentioned, between 5 and 15% in the 4 majors in UK. So a similar trend, but Ireland not so. They've gone back actually, but we think we've got headroom and we're in catch up on private label penetration. And we're seeing these increases in shoppers choosing private label from food and non-food categories. Categories like vitamins and supplements, high retail categories, surface and toilet cleaners, baby, which is interesting, and shower gel. And then top food categories where willingness to try private label has increased: chips, lots of snacking going on, health food, herbs and spices for all the cooking at home, seasonings, muesli bars, sports drinks, etc. Conversely, let's take a look at the trend for premium satisfaction and the top 10 categories where premium is high in importance for shoppers. Interestingly, Aldi, top scoring retailer, so we've compared like for like there, until a COVID-fueled push from IGA appeared. So IGA getting lots of exposure in local shopping and high streets. But these scores overall are lower satisfaction scores, whilst important ratings increase from the shopper. So lots of opportunity here for more premium in more categories. And shoppers tell us they're willing to pay more for something new or different in non-food categories, such as blades and razors, cat food, facial skincare, shampoo and conditioners, nappies, and food categories, chilled drinks, chips again, multi-pack biscuits, savoury crisp breads, and specialty cheese. So many brands fulfill that premium position for shoppers. So here's some other brands from David's poll. We measure over 500 brands across the 80,000 shoppers we talk to each year. And these are the top 20 increased loyalty performance brands for 2020. If your brand's here, great, congratulations. If not, just let us know and we can tell you where you are and where you post this season. We measure loyalty based on what shoppers do if their chosen brand isn't available. Do they switch flavour or pack size within the brand or choose another brand? So whether for health, reassurance or strong quality cues, these brands have performed well this year, including the uncertain times of the 4 months of COVID that's in this data. They've all increased their loyalty score by over 18%, sizable and significant increases on 2019. However, some brands have suffered this year, and here are the brands with the biggest declines in our loyalty measure, including some private label brands in the list again, which we saw in the previous list, which we do measure. And all of these brands have declined in our brand loyalty measurement year on year by, again, at least 18%, which is large and significant. So how do you maximise your brand's chance of success or motor on the current growth of private label? The key is to understand where the best opportunity is for success. So as an example, here's some analysis that crosses high willingness to buy, high willingness to try private label on the x-axis, with a willingness to pay a premium for something better, some quality or different measures. All the dots are categories. So the two quadrants on the right are where private label has a very real opportunity right now, either at the premium price point, top right, or classic value private label position, bottom right. Look how many categories there are in the top right, certainly far more than we used to see a few years ago, where premium private label simply wasn't credible here in Australia. So we're catching up with European and North American markets. Categories in that top right quadrant, high willingness to try private label and high willingness to pay more for quality, more different products, are typically fresh, for example, mince, packaged fresh chilled foods, for example, cookies, and high ticket items in non-food, for example, sun care. The categories in the left-hand quadrant are the ones where it's harder for private label to land. The supplier brand loyalty is strong. And this is where brands have much better chance of success as private label continues to expand elsewhere. If you want to know where your category or segment sits on this framework, put yes in the chat now, and we'll get back to you after the session. David, any questions coming in from this?
Absolutely, yes. I'm just having a look through now. Got lots of people talking, lots of yeses coming through from that. No surprises there. So we've got plenty of work to do after this, which is fantastic. Thanks, Caroline. So some extremely interesting dynamics at play here. Lots of questions coming in. Don't have time to answer all of them, but let's just touch on a couple. We had one question in here. Can we share rankings for my category? Yes, absolutely. Just drop me a question and we will follow up. Obviously, many of you are responding with a yes in the chat box now, which is fantastic. Another question about this deck. Remember, we will be sharing a link to the recording once the session is over. Just quickly, one other one I wanted to touch on here. It's a question in from a gentleman by the name of Richard. I'm not seeing brand loyalty shift through sales data, but your metrics suggest that they should be. Can you clarify what's going on there, please? Now, this is very interesting in that it highlights really the difference between looking backwards and looking forwards, the lag versus the lead measures, if you will. Now, you need both, okay? And we often talk about the pieces of the jigsaw. You saw that right at the start of this session. Sales or loyalty data is very important, but it is historic and it doesn't highlight opportunities or threats that haven't actually been introduced into the market yet. So what we do is look at what shoppers want or are willing to pay for or are willing to try. And that tells us and tells you where the white space is, even if the brand or the proposition or the solution doesn't even exist in market yet. So when things are changing as quickly as they have this year, and there's every reason to expect that we're going to see another 6 to 12, possibly even 18 months of very fast-paced change as the situation continues to evolve, that extra dimension to your view is going to be even more important. Otherwise, it could be too late by the time you see the result in your scan data. We'll come back to some more questions very soon, but for now, I'm going to hand back to you, Caroline. Okay, over to you.
Great, thank you, David. Okay, theme 2, e-commerce. COVID has driven, massive growth on top of massive growth, massive organic growth in e-commerce, resulting in, we saw the retailers' results announced a couple of months ago, over 40% in online sales, over 40% growth in online sales in Australia, and even higher in New Zealand this year. So what are the hypotheses for this? What does it mean going forward? We talked about, is it the possible death of bricks and mortar, ultimately, bricks and mortar stores? Have we lost the opportunity for impulse? How do I drive impulse? Lots of my clients asking me this. And isn't online just all about price? Also, e-commerce isn't just about online shopping. Equally important is the path to purchase. And something particularly topical is the catalogue and catalogue triggers. So we'll come back to those hypotheses. I'm just going to dig into the catalogue a little bit. So how important is the catalogue? Well, 13% of shoppers buy into a category they've seen in the catalogue because they saw it on offer in the catalogue. Coles has always been higher than this at 16% and Woolworths lower at around 10%. And are Coles taking a risk then in removing their paper catalogue, moving entirely to online? On the right, you can see the categories which trigger a purchase particularly well in the catalogue. David, over to you for the next poll on this topical subject.
Indeed, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question here is, among shoppers who buy because of a catalogue, when that was their trigger, what proportion of purchases, what percentage were driven by shoppers reading the paper catalogue only? In other words, they did not interact with a digital catalogue as well. Seismic shift in approach from one of our major retailers here in Australia. I remember just how shocked I suppose I was when I came down to Australia a couple of years ago that the paper catalogue did still seem to hold such an important role. And so now we're going to find out what you think about the answer to this question. We are up to about 70% voted. So the options are 81% who respond only to the paper catalogue, 51% or 31%. So I'm going to close, and I'm actually going to hold fire on the answer again this time because it's coming up in the very next slide. But let's first see what you have voted for. So coming up third, 81%. In the middle, we have 51%, that's 34% of you, and 31% is the response for 37% of you. So I'm going to hand back to Caroline, and we're going to find out what the answer is. Caroline, it's over to you.
Thanks, David. Keeps jumping out again. Just 1 sec. Technical difficulty. Sorry. Simon, I don't know whether you can get that at your end.
Yeah, hold on.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Hold on a sec. Sorry, everybody, just bear with us.
We have it, folks.
Okay, just 1 sec. I don't.
While you're just getting to where you need to be, Caroline. Simon, I was just going to ask you there, this is obviously such a massive shift. Do you remember seeing anything as big as this in terms of a change of approach back in the UK? And do you remember anything that came as a result of it, if you cast your mind all those years back?
I think my days back in the UK were well before the internet even existed, almost in the early 2000s, working at Tesco. I mean, we did have a big investment in pre-store advertising through our flyer Price News, but of course the big difference is in this region, Australia and New Zealand, but certainly Australia compared to Europe or North American markets is the difference in reach of catalogue. In other words, it's relevant to all sorts of demographics, and we did invest a lot from a lower income point of view. But the role of catalogue here, in terms of being fully ingrained in how shoppers operate, is unique and heightened from a COVID point of view. Never seen anything like this globally. No country reacts to the catalogue like we do, or we and New Zealand, and COVID has exacerbated that. So we are unique, and this is why this is such an important point. And if not sure if you can see that slide now, but this is the enormity of it. So back to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Simon. A few technical difficulties in Melbourne. Yes, so here's the result. Yes, a massive 51% of shoppers who purchased from a catalogue trigger read the paper version only. 38% of all shoppers who purchased from a catalogue trigger read the digital catalogue only. So you've got the currently 11% reading both. And this variation is even higher when you look at different age splits. So particularly 55-year-olds, 2 in 3 shoppers who read the paper catalogue and only go on to buy the advertised category are over 55. So are Coles taking a big risk with their older shoppers, or will they eventually win this one with the new Move Advantage? Will their shoppers quickly gravitate to the digital Coles catalogue, or perhaps stay with the paper and switch to Woolworths or other retailers? So which categories are reliant on paper catalogue? We can tell you that. How old is your shopper? You've let us know that. We can throw that into the mix. Are you planning to increase investment elsewhere? Watch this space. So, online shopping, click and collect, fastest growth. So we're going to go and look at these hypotheses now. Death of bricks and mortar, loss of impulse, all about price. Well, click and collect has seen the biggest growth and now makes up the biggest proportion of sales online, because it's eroding that speed of delivery issue for online shoppers, and obviously taking away the delivery purchase price as well. But it also brings shoppers back to the store. So easy to visit the store prior to your pickup slot, if enticed. Price. Price is the second most important factor for shoppers when shopping in store. Freshness is number 1. So if it's not a fresh department, price is the most important factor in store. But price is the third most important factor for online shoppers, with fresh and accuracy of fulfillment higher. Promotions are not ranked as high on importance in store either for online shoppers, and brand loyalty is higher as out of stocks are not apparent. So that busts that myth. And shopping for an occasion, we know, drives impulse, as it does in store as well. So that drives impulse. So that's busted as well. And 50% of online shoppers tell us they buy more products than they plan to buy online. So there you go. Impulse is there. And the impulse biggest opportunities are the discovery pages. We know shoppers love those. The inspiration, the information pages, plus using rewards and recipes as incentives. Free samples, new products, product reviews, these can all drive impulse. And bundles and multi-buys are attractive as well and drive impulse. And yes, 70% of shoppers browse the promotions page. So impulse opportunity here as well. Okay, theme 3, health. So one of the top 5 big concerns for Australians, you know, along with keeping their jobs, absolutely right now, paying for mortgages and global security. Along with those big themes is health. And health has significantly increased in our data as well in terms of importance factors for the shopper. Health has 2 aspects really for your category and brand. Increase table stakes. You have to be healthy or healthier to be relevant and future-proof. Increase premium opportunity is the second piece. In some categories, shoppers are willing to pay more for healthier solutions. Aldi is currently leading the game here on health, delivery for the shoppers, followed by Woolworths, with Coles very close. And IGA, some improvements through COVID, absolutely. Here is the top 10 categories where shoppers rate healthy choices as very important. Over to you again, David, I think for our final poll.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Gosh, I was just so engrossed in answering questions that I nearly missed you, but here we go with our final poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch it, which is here. So which of these best describes the health conscious shopper? Bit to read, so I'll leave it up for a few seconds. Basically, is it those who are pre-kids? Is it those who are in the middle of the storm, as it were, as far as kids are concerned? Is it the empty nesters? So pre-kids, those who are browsing, those who are up for quality, they're not necessarily as brandable. Is it those with families, with children at home, more likely to be sticking to a list, want to get in and out as quickly as possible, generally more focused on price and value? Or is it the post family, the empty nesters, planning through a catalogue more often, which we just saw, and tending to be more brand loyal? What do we think? There is a very clear-cut winner on this one, I can tell you that for sure. I'm going to give it about another 2 seconds or so, and I'm going to now close, and we will reveal what you have said. You have voted somewhat conclusively for the pre-kids group, very much less so, only 1 in 5 of you voting for the empty nesters. I'm going to leave you in suspense momentarily and say, Caroline, what is the answer to this one? Back to you.
All right, David, thank you. So how important is that healthy shopper, and who is that healthy shopper? Well, the answer is very important, and here's how to pinpoint them and build your comms to talk to them in the right way to trigger purchases. So typically they are sinks and dinks, so single income, no kids, dual income, no kids, or young couples with very young children. They are very impulsive, love to browse, so that's big implications for space and marketing in store. They're not promotionally driven, quality far more important than price, and promotions can drive volume but not switching, which is interesting, and volume at home, and volume which nicely drives expandability. So when marketing to these kind of shoppers, think dinner, think breakfast, the key meals, but also think gifts. These shoppers value and enjoy food, and so they will gift them to others. They're also loyal to the store once hooked. However, they're not brand loyal currently. They will switch within a group of brands if out of stocks is found. They have a high willingness to try private label. Again, a great loyalty driver for the retailer. So that's how you understand them, and that's how you get under the skin of them and talk to them in the right language. David, any questions following that?
We have so many questions. We had a question which I have just responded to here. A question here now, do we know yet if Coles shoppers have adopted the digital catalogue? A little bit early for us to say definitively. I think the main thing to point out there is that from our perspective, from a shopper perspective, we are in field all year round. So as our data comes through over the next 2 to 3 months, we will get a very quick response on that, and we'll be able to see if digital is growing as a contact point for Coles shoppers. Not surprisingly, a lot of questions about Coles, about the catalogue. Does it mean that Coles has made a mistake in getting rid of their printed catalogue? I think it's clear from excuse me, what Caroline has said that it's not a mistake. It's certainly more a question of understanding what the contact points, what are the trigger points going to be in each individual category. What were they prior to this shift? And what are the others that are in the mix for shoppers in a category? And then it's about getting together very collaboratively, talking as retailer and supplier about upweighting, emphasizing those other trigger points. I'll just throw that out to you, Simon, as well. Anything you want to add there, just to close out the point about catalogue?
No, look, well, nothing to add really. I'll just reinforce that. I think it's about understanding your category and your brand's role in that, and how you can appeal to those who do love digital, and increase the impact of your pre-store investment in catalogue because of the move to digital. You know, look at it as an opportunity, not a threat. But if your shopper base is a bit older, then there is a bit of a risk. So, you know, how do you mitigate that, and you know, drive them into digital options, or give them other pre-store triggers to help them do that?
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to touch on another couple because there's so much stuff coming in now, and they are all very good. What role does origin or Australian or provenance or Australian made play in the purchase decision? Well, the critical thing is it obviously depends on the category. If you remember a little bit earlier, we touched on all of those importance factors for shoppers across all of the different categories. Australian is in there. It's what we would consider to be one of those differentiating factors. It isn't typically as important as some of your more value for money or your shelf basics type of factors. But of course, what we did see, excuse me, is that it has increased during the last 6 months or so. So of course, now the next step on that is exactly how significant is it, and what change has it made to my category? That's what you want to dig under the skin of now, and that's where you want to be going to next. On that note, I'm going to pause because I actually need to read a couple of the questions that have come in and digest them, but there are a couple of others that we can have a look at before we close out today. So I'm going to hand back to you, Caroline, and just give us a final summary of those trends today, if that's okay.
Yep, thanks, David. Yeah. Okay, to summarize that all, you know, COVID has shifted shopper behavior, absolutely, to highly planned main shops. But we think that's going to probably drift back to that occasion driving that we were seeing before in time, but you know, we don't know how quickly for sure. But COVID has also fueled longer term trends, and these are the ones that we wanted to focus on today, and the importance of differentiating factors that we touched on. And yes, we can dig into all of those by category for you. The big themes from today are health, the value equation, including that premium piece, and e-commerce. However, remember, these national trends mask enormous differences by category and brands within the categories. The value equation was a great example, with some categories leaning heavily to price and value, including private label, which we saw on the framework, while other categories offer big opportunities to premiumize, predominantly in the branded area. So brand loyalties and private label willingness are also shifting fast. You know, if I may offer one word of advice, it's understand this opportunity or threat now before your sales data tells you it's too late. All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Back to David to wrap up with the themes and any key questions we've had in. David?
Yes, absolutely, fantastic. Thank you, Caroline. I can see, so we've got a bit of time left, and we've got plenty of people here, and there's lots of questions being asked. So I'm going to throw a couple of these out. I'm going to put you on the hotspot, Caroline and Simon. There's one here that I think is particularly interesting. We touched on it earlier. Excuse me while I transfer back over here, so I'm looking at you all. So question was, what do we think have been the main drivers of shoppers switching into Woolworths during the pandemic, excluding recent switching driven by Ushi's? Now, of course, we have a view based on the trip in the retailer that a shopper has actually done. We're not looking specifically at switching, but perhaps just going back to those importance performance measures that we touched on earlier. Simon, do you want to touch on that? I can see Caroline nodding. what do we think have been the key shifts that would have worked out well for Woolies over that period in terms of satisfaction?
Yeah, I can start on this, Carol, and maybe you've got something to add to it as well. But I mean, just reiterating the key takeout from our perspective is the increases in satisfaction, because that tells us where the retailers are doing particularly well from a shopper perspective. Now, it's first and foremost, it's important to say that Coles and Woolworths and the others did a pretty good job. But at the edges, Woolworths' satisfaction around food categories was the difference. So if you're looking for a reason why people have switched, it's because shoppers were a bit more satisfied with food categories through that period, so packaged food in particular. And then the next level down from that is, well, what are the factors that are important within food? And of course, as we've already seen through the shock, supply chain, so in other words, out of stocks, reassurance, price was relatively less important during the COVID period, although it's coming back now, has come back now. But supply chain, and then the differentiating factors around quality, health, Australian, and environment and things like that, supporting the food categories. So that's from our data, that's the reason.
Thank you, Simon. Anything to add, Caroline?
Yeah. A few other things we noticed as well was health and beauty as well was increased satisfaction, and we saw that coming from younger shoppers coming in because they probably couldn't go to Mecca or David Jones or places. So whether Woolworths satisfied them better, and we saw general satisfaction increase across H&B. So whatever they saw, they liked, which is interesting. Woolworths have got more regional stores, so where everybody's been moved to their 5Ks or keeping to the high street, perhaps Woolworths satisfied them better. Coles had the first supply chain issue, which was fresh, and I think that had a big impact. And then maybe Ushi's latterly, not sure on that one.
Okay, let's just have a look at a couple of other things now. We're getting a little bit specific, but I think it's worth touching on a couple of these just to highlight, I guess, some of the different ways that you can get to an answer through looking at shopper data. So questions come in: would the health shopper also apply to the men's grooming category? So I mean, throwing from that what we were talking about in terms of the profile of that health shopper, would that be the same, or would it be reflected in terms of men's grooming? Now, one of the beauties of our program is that we ask effectively the same questionnaire across all categories, all 200 plus categories in store, which is what enables you then to pick out the fine details, the granularity, the shades of grey between different categories based on a like-for-like basis. Having said that, of course, there are some questions in which it doesn't necessarily make so much sense to ask that question. Now, healthy choices, I've got it on my screen here actually next to me, is one of those ones that we don't ask specifically in male grooming, but there are ways to get to that. So we do ask around the importance and performance of things like environmental credentials. Australian provenance is something that we ask in male grooming, also premium, and one or two other measures as well. So even though we haven't got that specific measure, we can look at it through a number of different lenses, and you can then actually build a profile of the shopper in men's grooming, or any category for that matter, that fits a certain profile. And then you can look at what is particularly important to them, and also critically, whether those things are performing or not. So there are lots of different ways to get to those sorts of views. Final one I was just perhaps going to touch on now, just again, maybe to get your view, Simon, Caroline, on how we would approach something like this. Which categories are doing occasion messaging best online? So I think similar sort of thing. This is one where we come at it from a slightly different angle. Simon looks deep in thought, so I'm going to go to him, get his view on how we would have a look at something interesting like that one.
Well, again, Caroline's our expert from an online perspective, but the key, so occasion-based shopping and buying for dinner, for example, has massively increased over the last few years, and online has had to take that on, because it's certainly something is a big reason why people come into store these days, and something that's now reflected from an online platform. The way the websites that are doing it well are encouraging people to on the front page, on the front screen, to click into that as a solution, rather than having to think about the components of that dinner for tonight and then navigate their way through the pages. So having it in one place, really reflecting what, for the last 10 or 15 years, retailers have, certainly in Europe anyhow, done well in terms of the, the $10 or $20 meal deal type principle. So everything in one place, one click. Here's your 3 components of the meal, all packaged up for you at a good price point. And now reflecting that principle, but doing it online. And of course, all of the all of the advertising and direct messaging that happens to get people onto the page in the first place through that mechanic. Caroline?
Yeah, I think so. We ran a big report for online shopping in November, across 500 shoppers. We saw the increase in impulse when you're shopping by occasion. So we can look at what categories, departments they were shopping in to do that, to see the best which was the best trigger for them to drive the impulse through the occasion. And then this year we are stepping up our reporting to have a online profile the same as the in-store profile by category. So we'll be able to see, and then you can cut and slice that by occasion, by impulse, by prepared to pay more, etc., etc. So we'll have a lot more detail with the new category reporting online this year.
For sure. Okay, thank you both. Time is now 11:51. There's one more that I think is worth touching on, because it goes back to this point we were making earlier around shifts in brand loyalty and the importance of the lag versus the lead measures. So Caroline, Simon, keep your ears open for this one. I'm going to read it out as it's come in. Hey David, still a question on the previous loyalty point. I looked at Quantium loyalty data. It looks like our brand has increased loyalty. So just double checking, do you mean the increased loyalty will come back post-COVID, or do you mean loyalty will decrease to be even lower than before? Now, I think this brand was in the group that had seen decreased loyalty over the time period. So can we just qualify what is the direction that we're indicating here? What are we suggesting through our data so that we can be really clear on that?
Yeah,
Simon?
I'll take this one as well. So it's a great question, and we do see it happen from time to time. There's 2 different things happening here. One is the behavior, and then one is the mindset. The behavior on a brand like that can easily be driven by poor out of stocks or poor shelf, poor ranging, poor segmentation that has forced people to stay with a brand or switch into a brand simply because the other choices weren't in stock or were poorly reflected on shelf. However, that can easily mask the mindset, which is actually I'm less bothered about staying loyal to a brand. And if that other brand or other choice was presented in a way, either it was in stock or it was presented in a way that was better or a better price point or whatever that might be, then I would be more willing to switch into it. So the behavior might be forced currently, and that's reflective in Quantium data or anything else in terms of what people are doing. But the mindset is, as soon as that other brand or choice gets their act together and presents something that is is going to compete with it, then people were more likely to switch into that because their mindset has enabled that. So two sides of the same coin. Behavior is what we see. There could be lots of reasons for that, but actually the mindset or the willingness of somebody to switch.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Caroline?
So the only thing I'd add to that is, so our loyalty data is slightly different in that, it says what would you do if this wasn't available, as opposed to, I think, one that just shows the scan and the consistency. But what we're going to do next is look at the satisfaction resulting from these loyalty increases and decreases. And like I said, on health, baby, beauty, where we've seen more shoppers come in and the satisfaction go up, we expect that to sustain. So if we see an increase in loyalty and the satisfaction go up, we expect that to sustain. If the satisfaction wasn't there, because I tried something else or I didn't get the brand that I wanted, then that could change things. So that's the next stage of our analysis.
Terrific. Okay, Caroline, thank you. Simon, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have time for now. I want to thank you again for joining us today, and thank you for all your engagement. Remember, you will be receiving a link to the recording very shortly. We are going to come back to you on the questions that you've posed. We'll fill you in on the rankings that you've requested. If you have any other questions on any of today's themes, what shoppers are doing in your category, or any other shopper perspectives that you'd like in your business, then please contact either Caroline or myself. Thanks again, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Goodbye.